And I am very excited to have this next guest on the Mom Game. May was Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's something that is very present in all of our worlds, our children's worlds, our worlds. And that's one of the reasons I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Michael Milobsky onto the show. Thanks so much for joining us one more
Thank you.
time.
Yeah, thank you for having me again.
Yes, I know. Emily handled the last interview, and I was actually really bummed to miss it. And I've been very much looking forward to chatting with you. I know you have a ton of experience, over 20 years as a pediatrician. You've got 7 kids yourself.
I do have 7 kids, 3 grandchildren now, too.
Oh my gosh. So 10 little humans that not only do you have to remember their names, but also like everything else
Birthdays,
about
that's
them.
it. It's the birthdays that are the bigger.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you obviously love children. I guess just for a little background, maybe not so much. How'd you get into this field, and just tell me about why you chose to do this for a living?
That's a great question. It I think many people, when they decide to go into medicine, and then you go through the process of going into med school, at least in my experience, I didn't have a firm, like, fixed view of what kind of doctor I wanted to be. I was just always sort of tuned that way. And so when I ended up, when I went into medical school, and then you start your rotations through all of the different major fields of medicine, and I can't speak for everybody, but I think for me, you tend to gravitate to areas where you resonate with the people who are doing it, the doctors that are there, and you feel a sense of kinship, you feel connection, you feel, hey, this is an environment and a culture that I like. I think part of that also for me was that I was also already married and I already had a child. So being a parent, a young parent at that time, and going through that process, I think pediatrics really just felt so relevant and
Yep.
so urgently uh, part of my day-to-day experience that I think that's just why I gravitated to it.
Yeah.
um it probably helped that the only job I ever had in high school was some sort of camp counselor, so obviously there was some sort of aptitude there.
Right.
And that's how I ended up ultimately in pediatrics. And I think that my just my first run, the first part of my career in pediatrics was exclusively in pediatric emergency and inpatient critical care work. And when I opened my own practice 11 years ago, and I began to really be much more involved in mental health. And then, of course, somewhere around 2015, 2016, 2017, seeing this massive demand in our pediatric office and all pediatric offices for people wanting mental health help, and then really tuning into the adolescent mental health issues in this country that were rapidly rising and increasing. And then opened up our own actual separate adolescent mental health clinic connected to our practice in 2021. And so that has sort of been my journey, in this direction, and seeing how mental health is and mental health issues affect kids, families, how they start and progress, and can be something that's very present from very young, and having at least an understanding of the complex interplay between the household, the culture, the society, the school, and all the things that we have to be aware of. It's very different than it was in the 1980s and the 1990s. So
Yeah.
that's
So
been
you're
our
in you're it's scary how necessary your field of work is right now, but you're also in the right field of work to be have a lot of patience and
right.
to help a lot of people. Um so we talk a lot on our show about specifics with our family. I've been talking on the show about my own son, who was recently, just a few months ago, diagnosed with um ADHD, anxiety, uh, depression type tendencies. He's only 9, and I think I do everything I can to give him a happy, healthy life.
Right.
But it's scary, right? Because you talk to other
Mhm.
moms and they're like, me too, my kid too, my kid too. How are you handling it? What can we do?
Right.
Almost to the point where you feel like if every child did go get tested, there'd be something going on with them. And it's the parents who decide to get their kids tested where they find out, and they pay $2,000 in this case to
Right.
find out.
Yes.
Needless to say, it's rampant right now. And like you referenced, the culture, I think, is a big part of it. But overall, generally, you being in this field, are we in a mental health crisis? Are we in something that maybe we haven't seen?
We're definitely in the midst of something we haven't seen before in terms of raising children and these mental health issues emerging at rates and levels that we've not seen before. Um, and if you look at it as sort of a public health issue, there's no question that there isn't ever any one thing that you can say, hey, it's because of X or it's because of Y. There's always a complex interplay of multiple factors that that kind of create the situation that we find ourselves in as parents raising kids who are struggling. And your impression is absolutely right. The numbers bear that out. The statistics that the CDC puts out and many other credible sources show that really since 2011, but even before then, there's been a steady, clear increase in all of these issues. Um, and if we're, you know, anxiety, depression, and then of course there is a lot said about attentional issues and where that falls in. But there's no question that these things are in general increasing. The demand for from families and parents to get help and intervention has been overwhelming, and in most areas it's harder to find because the supply is not meeting the demand in terms of what families and parents need. So if your question is, are we in a crisis? I mean, crisis is a strong word.
Mhm.
But we are definitely experiencing a clear overall pattern of these increasing in frequency and severity and how commonly they are occurring amongst our children. There's no question.
I think what's kind of scary to me is knowing this information, right? Like the
Right.
gradual like growth of these diagnosi. What is the proper word here? I've been wondering for a while.
Diagnoses, maybe
Okay,
diagnoses. Yeah.
diagnoses. Yes, because I'll try to talk about like my own
Yeah.
son, and I'm like diagnoses. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the proper word is. Diagnoses.
Right.
Um, the gradual increase of it, and parents kind of knowing that this is happening, but not being able to stop the things
Yeah.
that are causing it, myself included. I
Right.
know that screens are terrible. I know that Fortnite's probably the worst thing that my son could be doing, but all his other friends were doing it and he was feeling left out, and that led to depression. My mom won't let me. So all of a sudden he's playing
Right.
Fortnite, and now it's like, why did I ever let him do this? He comes out of this little game room and he's in fight or flight mode and just mean to everybody in sight.
Yeah.
But, and these things are, it's happening, but because everybody's doing it, because it's become the norm, it's just harder
Right.
to pull back and stop.
For
And
sure.
all the activities, right? Like overloading our kids. Like they have to play every sport, and every sport's going to need 1 to 2 practices a week when they're 10. And he just he just didn't make a football team as a 9-year-old. Like
Mm.
that didn't help. So just all this stuff, but then it's hard to change. It's hard to change this culture.
It
But
is.
I guess my question would be like, how much of it is culture, society, the way that parents are kind of, or
Sure.
the world that kids are being raised in, how much of it is innate, I guess,
Yeah.
in a child?
So if we want to talk about like if we want to just like let's just talk about like ADD type picture because it's so prevalent, it's so common, and it's also as you've probably experienced, and I have a child with severe ADD as well. There's a wide range of how it looks, but we are all feeling like we're seeing this so much more, and every pediatrician office is being asked to talk about this and evaluate it and treat it, and parents are being confronted from their schools and everywhere else that your child might have this, right?
Yeah.
So there's no question that these are things that are part of our genetics. I mean, meaning that ADD is not one thing. It's a kind of a range of it's like an operating system. And the other thing is that many other factors that are not actually attention deficit disorder or ADHD can present with those symptoms as experienced by teachers and coaches and other things as well,
Right.
which makes the whole thing even more confusing.
Yeah.
And given how the range of time we're talking about, let's just take the last 20 years, that certainly we can't just say, oh, people's genetics have changed, and so now we have this more. This is stuff that's just part of our neurodevelopmental makeup, and there are external factors that are clearly pushing more of us and our children, especially kids who might be more vulnerable, maybe because of genetics, into, hey, showing up with the symptoms because our society didn't have these other pressures and other things maybe 20 or 30 years ago in the same way or in the same amount. And that's why I always hesitate to talk about it or try to oversimplify it, because I think that does a disservice. Oh, it's because of Fortnite. Fortnite causes ADHD. It's never that simple. And however, Fortnite being an example of kind of like bigger issues in our the environment that children's brains are now developing in, which are more, I don't, if you want to use a more toxic in a certain way,
Yeah.
or more
Intense.
challenging
Yeah.
than the last generation. Let's just call it millennials and Gen Z and Gen X, that that are that have the potential to bring more of these things out. And of course, tons of influencers and people on social media and the information overload. And I think I talked about it with your colleague last time, that makes parenting even harder, because we've never lived in an information age where parents feel so insecure and so anxious about every single choice and thing that we do, because we're getting inundated on all sides with information overload, and it's hard to know, well, what applies to me, what's really important here, what's not. And so that makes everything harder. And so I do really like, though, there's the work of an author. He's been out in the media recently because he did write a book on this. I think he's kind of a rational voice. Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist, and he wrote the book Rewiring of Childhood. Now, he's also trying to sell books, so of course he's gonna kind of push it on he's gonna push his point maybe a little bit further, because it sells books and gets clicks. But what his point is that since 2011, you can sort of point to a generalized enmeshment with these technological factors that kids today, our youngest kids, are now growing up integrated completely with, that certainly has negative, spiraling impacts on how kids emotionally and neurodevelopmentally go through these very critical periods of brain development. And as we have these really critical windows from the toddlerhood, where it's really easy to filter our kids' worlds, from 0 to 3 or 0 to 4, and then these periods from middle childhood and school age, when our kids are off to school, and it's a lot harder to filter their whole world, because, like you pointed out, they have friends, they have a social life, and they want to be part of that. So we can't always control every factor. And then the really critical window of adolescence, which about 11, 12, 13, all the way through 25, where our entire emotional, logical, and thinking brains are all maturing and enmeshing and developing and learning how to communicate effectively. That's why, for instance, substance abuse during that time can have such profound long-term impacts on emotional well-being and mental health, because of that critical window. And so this topic of how technology has not just affected what our kids are looking at on screens, but how they actually physically live their lives and engage the world around them from the very beginning, which his point is that there's no way that can't have an impact on why we are seeing this whole change, this shift in mental health issues that we're all experiencing, and is being, confirmed by the numbers.
So when it comes to the mental health issues and after you get a diagnosis,
Yeah.
as a parent, you have a lot of different options, a lot of different ways that you can kind of move with this information, move forward with it. Um, and medication's a hot button topic. I think probably every kid's different,
Mhm.
but I just want to know your take on, giving our kids the medication to help
Sure.
with these diagnoses that they have. And then my fear with it is just like going down the path of trying to figure out the right one, and then this
Yeah.
and then that, and the pros and the
Sure.
cons and all that. But sometimes that's what you have to do. So just would love to
Right.
hear your take on that.
Sure. So I think the idea of medicine, especially for the youngest kids who are struggling, it's a scary topic for parents, because you also read a lot about medication. I think the discussion about medication has to be One, starting with being really properly evaluated and not just, uh, I think too many times, especially in a stressed world where you have parents who are working, maybe two income households, they've got these terrible reports from school and they reel the kid in and go, hey, they said he needs meds, instead of going through a comprehensive evaluation to really understand what we're treating or not treating. So that's the first part, is not succumbing to our own anxiety and just pressures from public school because that's what they want for your kid, but what's really best for your kid, and being really properly evaluated. And that can be done in many different ways. Mental health clinics like ours, pediatric offices do a great job, psychiatrists, which are a lot less available. A lot of kids need what you probably had, which is a neuropsych evaluation, which is with a psychologist to make sure, hey, are we understanding all the learning, mood, and ADD issues that can all be sort of, kind of interplaying to kind of create the symptoms we're seeing. So that's one. And two is, for the right kid, for the right child who's been properly evaluated, medicine can be life-changing. I just had a kid recently said it was like all of a sudden I put on glasses and I could see, which is pretty dramatic. And when you do medicine correctly and it's properly evaluated and properly done, um, your child can have this massive shift in their self-image, their feeling of competence. All of a sudden, effort and outcome line up, where before it was so demoralizing because no matter what they did, they felt they were spinning their wheels. They're more emotionally regulated because ADD is not just an executive functioning disorder; it's also an emotional disorder and affects their emotional balance. So, all those things, medicine um, is not something to be feared. However, I believe that traditional mental health and traditional pediatric medicine and adolescent medicine are finally catching up to the fact that there's a whole world of integrative and functional parts of this that have been largely, if not discounted, then minimized, which I think we are understanding now can have a huge impact on the symptoms, your relationship with medicine, how your medicine works, maybe whether it works even better than it could, or how much you might need, or whether you might need to be treated in the same way at all. And once again, you don't want to oversell any one thing as, oh, well, if you're selling a supplement, you want people to believe, or if you're selling, some sort of service, you want people to believe that this will be the solution to all your problems. And the truth in medicine rarely is that. Rarely usually it's okay, this has a role just like medicine has a role. But I believe recognizing and acknowledging the role of these other things has been hugely beneficial. And that's one of the things that in my journey through the mental health and adolescent mental health, I've had to self-educate on this because it wasn't given to me, and have really benefited. I can see the benefit in my mental health patients as well. So it's a broad thing. Medicine shouldn't be feared. It's not the big evil, but there's lots of other things we should also be understanding about mental health and management.
Speaking of the other things, we recently had a brain map done
Oh yeah.
on my son, and just learned so much about his brain, and like why we
Mhm.
found out he was like had insomnia, and
Mhm.
wasn't sleeping properly, and there was inflammation, maybe because of a food sensitivity. And it was just really, really cool, if nothing else, to
Yeah,
kind of see that report. How does the brain health factor in?
so brain health and brain maps, I think, need time to show up. I think once again, who's doing it, who's promoting it, what their background is, how they're using it. So I think there's roles for all these things, and there probably will be soon better ways to do this in a more with evidence-based sort of confirmation. We're just lacking a lot of that now, even though we know a lot of this works and helps.
Hmm.
But there's so many factors to brain health, and especially in the functional integrative space, understanding how your brain health is now connected to all these other areas, especially your gut function and gut health, and especially in the world of mental health, how so much of that is so intimately linked in ways we are just starting to understand, and
Yeah.
how inflammation now is connected to that. And so that's why a lot of clinics like mine, in our mental health clinic, our appointments need to be now 60, 90 minutes, because we want to talk about all of these things. And families like yours, Julie, and many more want or demanding a bigger discussion, other than just someone who's filling out prescription pads. Not that there isn't a role and not that those can't be helpful if done correctly, but I think every parent wants to know, and much more tuned into the topics that you just brought out. What are these other areas and where else can we intervene and help beyond just prescriptions?
Right. Yeah, it's such an interesting conversation. And I love hearing you say that we're kind of on the cusp of like learning a lot more about it all with the functional medicine and the brain health. And I think that's why maybe a lot of
And the gut
parents,
health too.
the gut
How
health.
intimately linked the gut health has to do with so many mental health things that we're
Yes.
just starting to open that box in a big way.
Wow, I know. And I know that's one of the things that the True Heights vitamins like can help with a lot of this stuff, right? With the kids and just vitamins in general. There's a lot out there.
There's a lot out there, and some of it's valid, and some of it's not.
Right.
Just depending on, having to
It's
have
too many
a good
questions for
judgment.
one mom, right? Like, how
Right.
are we supposed to sort through
Well,
all
listen,
this?
I think the challenge. I think you brought up the challenge of parenting in the information age is the filter, because you are literally overwhelmed. So you guys have gone through this process. So let's say you and all of us are now social media beings. The amount of stuff that we could find is literally almost infinite, overwhelming. And how does someone think no? How does what are the credible sources? I'll just bring up one particular person because
Yeah.
I think that she is a thought leader in this area that has so many connections. Dr. Elisa Song, Song. She's a pediatrician, but she has made herself a real expert in the area of complementary functional integrative and gut health, and how that connects in metabolic health, mental health, and all these other things, starting even from very young. But she's an example of someone and who is a really, really good source, who uses credible modes, credible evidence-based ways of going about it. This is an example of someone who people should listen to in this
Yeah.
area, and
Yeah.
not someone, who maybe doesn't have her credentials and doesn't have her background, but is selling a bottle of X.
Right.
So it just
And
you
there's a
have to
lot of that,
develop,
right?
and it's hard because there's so much out there to
Yeah.
develop the filter. But and I think parents have to be their own advocates, because so many of us in pediatrics, myself included, are still trying to catch up
Right.
and really understand where all these things fit in and how they can help, and what things to deploy and what things are most beneficial and what things are less. And
Mhm.
even at the highest levels of like academic medicine, you're finding there are now departments at Stanford University. They have their pediatric department has an integrative medicine department, and led by a real thought leader who wrote one of the seminal books on ADHD without medicine.
Mhm.
And so once again, you, the problem is that parents, when you're not in medicine, you tend to look at that stuff and you can read it and go, okay, well, this is the path I want to take. But not every path works the same for every kid. You have to be willing to sort of, hey, like everything else, usually the answer for your child and your best interest is multifactorial and lies somewhere in the middle, with using that information and more traditional means together.
Right. And we're not doctors, right? So I think what
Right.
you're doing, it sounds like what you're doing is very cool, where it's like a more of a
Yeah.
comprehensive sit down, visit with patients for a long time, look at this test, that test. I mean, I'm listed at a private facility with the psychiatrist, with the school.
Right.
He's had the brain map, and I'm like, I've got all this
Right.
information.
Right. What
I
do you
don't
do
know
with
what to
it?
do with it,
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
I
So
think
that,
it's key
yeah,
finding somebody, a doctor you trust, that can help guide you through this.
and put it together and find the right thing for you. And the other thing, ADHD, any path through ADHD and mental health in general is kind of like trying on shoes.
Mhm.
If you're a size 7 and you go to a store, there are multiple different shoes that you could try on at size 7. They will all fit slightly differently. So until we have, and science hopefully will have this, we're certainly not far from the area of being able to do a type of MRI scan and blood work and get all these biomarkers and know, okay, for you, these are the best things. But we're not there yet. I think a lot of your audience who is going through this might be exposed. There's this very popular mode of doing genetic testing for meds. They do these mouth swabs. They come up with all this information on your what you call, biopharmacological genetic profile. But even then, that information is still rough and doesn't really accurately guide treatment unless you've already had multiple problems and issues with side effects and med failures. So we're still very, very early in that process. And so but that's not far off from us to being able to do that more. But yes, you still need what most people need is gathering the information and then working with someone who can give you the time to sort of walk you through all of the parts and picking out and emphasizing the ones that, hey, this for sure for you should be emphasized, and then being able to follow you up.
Mm-hmm.
The current insurance system in pediatrics makes that hard to do.
It does. So people kind of feel like they're between a rock and a hard place,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Are you you're in Colorado, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So do you do virtual patients or do you just see patients there in Colorado?
We do virtual patients. It just depends on where they are.
Yeah.
And how we can, and what they need, and consultations can be done. It just depends on, prescribing medicine can be tricky if it's someone who's in a far-flung state where I'm not seeing them.
We just need more of you around here is my point.
But I mean, listen, the challenge that all of us are seeing, if you have kids and you go to a pediatric office, the challenge for complex problems that your pediatrician is perfectly capable and able to do, but simply is not given the ability because of how time and reimbursement and expenses are structured. That is not run by the doctor and not run by the patient, but run by the insurance companies.
Yep.
And so as someone who owns a large practice, the pressure to have to see in our office 6 patients an hour does not leave us the ability, even with all of the capabilities in the world, to spend the right amount of time, especially for mental health issues. That's why we opened up a separate mental health clinic to be able to address that. Because time is what people need. You're experiencing that yourself. So you're getting kind of little bits of time here or there to piece this all together to come up with a plan.
Right. Yeah. We've actually also recently shifted my family to a practice where they do that. She got out of that world because of exactly what you're saying. She started her own practice and we can sit there for 60 minutes with her. But kids need a lot. Kids need a lot. My daughter's got asthma. He's got all the other things. So
sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. It's the problem.
Right. Sometimes they're perfectly healthy.
The whole system works great until your kid needs something. And then the office says, well, we can give you 7 minutes.
Not enough. Yeah, not enough. Okay, so I like to kind of leave our viewers with this has been wonderful. So much good information. But if there were a few, I guess, bullet points of the things that you say you were starting over with kids, right? And you had young kids, but you do have grandkids. So it's very pertinent in your world too. What are the kind of recommendations you would make when it comes to raising kids?
It's a great question because our oldest kids were born in the middle 90s, which was very different, and my 7th child was born in 2010. And my grandchildren are only 6, 4, and 2. So made plenty of mistakes as a parent. And knowing what I know now, let's just pretend I was doing this over. Knowing what I know now. So the first is, you have to acknowledge the fact that screens and tech are a part of our world, but they can be managed and people can be intentional. So picking what the actual, let's take our youngest kids. So picking what the actual content they're watching and what that actually looks like and feels like. There's very high energy, frenetic, low attention, stimulation content. And then there's a lot of other stuff out there that doesn't fit that bill. My daughter-in-law, when my grandkids were young, only let them watch Mr. Rogers episodes from the 70s. And it's just so dialed down. They were totally enthralled, but that was the only thing on, kids in the 70s, that was all we had. So things like that. So being intentional about what you pick and being intentional and really understanding about how much time they're spending and doing that from the get-go, because that's their first relationship with the world of technology. 2 is now as your kids get, and that's pretty easy for the first couple years of their life. As your kids get older, I would be much more self-aware and intentional about how I'm modeling in my own life for my kids' technology use. You can say anything you want to your kids, but they see everything that you're doing. So I would be much more intentional about modeling. Third is I'd be much more intentional about giving my kids more unstructured, less interventional play with their peers without over engineering and micromanaging. I think that we all tend to do this. We tend to do it because we have anxiety about safety. We have anxiety about our kids being supervised enough. But the data is clear that kids emotionally develop in a better way where they have more time that is less managed by adults. That's safe time, but less managed, and understanding that, being intentional about that would be a really big one. The next one for the next phase of childhood for me is understanding the importance of sleep and the quality of diet, especially like fiber, processed foods, ultra processed foods. I think that to me, when we were tired, overworked, overstressed parents, didn't think much about it, couldn't really devote much time to it. But now understanding how deeply important those things are, and the food environment in your house, all of that stuff has impact, especially during critical developmental windows. And then the next would be, I think, really, really, really having a clear household understanding and policy and approach to phones. When they're going to start, that your household is your household and everyone else's household is everyone else's household, and that's okay. And starting that conversation early. Our house doesn't have to look like other people's houses, and building community around you of people who feel the same. So there's collective action as opposed to trying to swim upstream by yourself, especially when it comes to phones. There's no question that delaying smartphones and social media access, especially well past middle school and into high school, has positive benefits on their relationship with those things going forward, and decentralizing those. So those are I think would be the biggest things that I can think of, like standing on one foot.
Yeah, that's
About
amazing.
why we're redoing parenting today.
Wow, I love that. I love that. And I think the more we can spread the word about it, the more
Right.
commonplace these things will be, the less stress you'll feel from society to do all the things and be on the phones and be on the screens.
100%.
So
Yeah.
I love that you're doing this. I love that this worked out where we got to chat. And
Yeah.
I think it will be beneficial to so many people.
Absolutely.
And we really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. I love these conversations.
Yeah, so do we. We'll have to do it again sometime for sure. I don't
Anytime. Yeah.
remember if Emily made you sign off with the peace signs or not, but
I think she did.
I'm gonna make you do it too because we're
Okay.
big dorks.
All right.
So,
That's okay.
so it's a
Love it.
double peace sign and it's a mom game out on the count of 3. 1,
Okay.
2, 3. Mom game out. Love it.
All right. Thank you
Awesome.
so much. Amazing.
Yes, thank you. You are wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Good. And let us know. Obviously, we'd love to share this stuff to our audience too, as much as we can. And
Yeah.
it's important stuff. It's important conversations to have. And
It really is. I know so many moms struggling and it's sad. so
yeah,
I think this is great. We'll splice up some social clips and then I'll also just have them put the whole interview on YouTube.
great,
Just
amazing,
like
and we can reference it. Yeah.
just the one interview without the rest of our show. So that way
Okay.
you guys can share it, reference it, link to it, whatever you'd like.
Beautiful. Amazing.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your
Yeah. You
time.
too, Julie. Have a great
Okay.
weekend.
You too. Bye.
Take care. Bye.